Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Lazy MTG channel, where we are covering the Royalty of the North match here for the second season of 2024. Before we get into the game specifics and players here, I just want to do a quick explanation of what's going on with this video. I didn't really want to sacrifice quality in terms of time, but this situation that we're in is a little bit of a weird one. And what I mean is the ban announcement is in 1 week, and so due to the timing of our invitational series and the ban announcement, I wanted to kind of get this video, out for you guys to watch as quick as possible before it kind of becomes a little bit irrelevant. Primarily because one of the players is playing Rescaminator, and a lot of people are, assuming that Grief is going to get banned in just under a week now. So that's why, while I'm recording this commentary, I don't have access to the hand cams at the moment. They're being uploaded. So I will have hand cams for you guys throughout the match. That will be done in post, but it might, kind of change my commentary a little bit just because I don't have access to that stuff at the moment. So while these players are doing their mulligans, we have on player one side the defending King of the North, the current King of the North, Boston Shatman, piloting Grixis Delver, one of the decks that he is known for. And we've seen him pilot this deck back in Season 1 against Jesse, and that was a mirror match. His opponent today is the one that won the Invitational. If you guys haven't watched that, the VOD is up on the channel. And we also have a short player interview with a kind of more of like a deck tech and player interview also on the channel. He did win the Invitational then, and it is Jaime Herzog playing Dimir Rescaminator. So we're going to see Jaime go first here. He plays an island and just passes the turn. Boston going to start with Volcanic Island, leading off with the namesake of this deck, Delver of Secrets. Going to follow it up with a Mishra's Bauble. Probably not going to crack it. Going to do the little Mishra's Bauble trick at the end of Jaime's turn, most likely. Although Boston's hand is looking pretty good with a Force of Will, Ponder, Psychic Frog, an Unholy Heat, and another Volcanic Island. He doesn't really need to crack the Mishra's Bauble if he doesn't want to. Although I'm pretty sure the strategy here is to flip Delver as soon as he can and just start chipping away while he has all of these defensive cards to kind of prevent Jaime from accomplishing what his deck wants to do, and that is putting a big fatty into the graveyard as quick as possible and reanimating it or using an animate dead to kind of cheat an Archon of Cruelty or an Atraxa into play. So we are going to see Boston at the end here. Jaime triggered a Surveil trigger, kept the card on top. At the end of the turn, Boston got a Mishra's Bauble and then go straight to his upkeep and going to reveal a Force of Will. Going to draw the reveal the Force of Will to flip the Delver and then draw for turn. Draw for the Bauble and then draw for turn. Sorry, that was a little messy commentary, but we're getting back into the swing of things. So Boston hastily goes straight into combat, swings Jaime down to 17. Now we're going to see Boston go into the tank, probably contemplating how he wants to utilize this Dragon's Reach Channeler and whether or not he does want to cast a Ponder. But he doesn't really need to take that many actions. He could kind of sit comfortably here if he wanted to. Although one of the strengths of Grixis Delver is putting that Dragon's Reach Channeler into play and just triggering Surveil to churn through your deck to find answers to make sure you prevent your opponent from doing things. But we're going to see him go with a Ponder instead, looking at Volcanic Island, Force of Will, Delver. So this hand is this Ponder is a pretty good keep. It just depends on what the order he wants to put it in. Having this double Force of Will in hand and then getting another Force of Will as backup and then another Delver to pitch as fodder is going to really shut down Jaime's game plan here. So I think what Jamie's really aiming to look for is trying to grief Boston and try to get rid of some of this interaction out of his hand. Because I don't think Boston wants to be trading a Force of Will into a grief. It just doesn't it does not seem correct. Boston going to play down the Volcanic Island after stacking the top of the deck with the Ponder. So you guys will be able to see how it is, but I do not. Just going to pass the turn after this Volcanic Island. Going to leave the Dragon's Reach Channeler in the hand. Leaves up Unholy Heat mana as well, but doesn't have Delirium. Although, unless Jamie's reanimating something, his threats aren't too large. I think it's the Psychic Frog that he really needs to play around. I don't think there's any other smaller creatures in the Rescaminator list. Jamie in the tank going to play Wasteland. Top 2, here's a Psychic Frog. Instantly gets a Force of Will out of Boston. Gonna exile his own Psychic Frog. So really valuing these Force of Wills. Jamie doesn't look like he's able to fight over it. Just gonna pass the turn. The beginning of Boston's upkeep, going to Wasteland one of the volcanic islands. Boston top decks another one. That's from the Ponder. Instantly goes into combat straight again. Going to try to close out the game as quick as possible here. Down comes Dragon's Rage Channeler after dropping Jamie down to 14. Gonna pass the turn after that. Has Delirium, land, instant, sorcery, artifact. So Dragon's Rage Channeler is now a 3/3 flyer. For those arena players, this is unnerfed. It is not a 3/1, it is a 3/3. Let's see if Jamie has anything to rebuttal with. So I think this is one of the weaknesses of Rescaminator, is if the opponent is applying pressure, you don't have a really good... I don't think you have a good way of dealing with the board without like immensely hurting yourself. And what I mean is like probably Archon of Cruelty. Like having Archon of Cruelty enter the battlefield, and then I guess if you use Animate Dead, it's not too harmful to yourself, but if you reanimate it, you take 8 points of life, which is kind of mitigated because you gain 3 life back, but you still not the best place you want to be. Here's Jamie reanimating a Psychic Frog. This should signal to Boston that he's either trying to bait out more interaction, or Jamie's hand is just not great. Doesn't really have a great way of putting a fatty into the graveyard. Pretty sure they're still playing Trolls, so I'm curious how... Like, obviously, you guys will have the information with the hand cams, but I wonder if Jamie's just trying to get something to... I wonder if Jamie's just starting to try to get something going here. I mean, Psychic Frog is a decent way to start doing something. If there are useless cards in Jamie's hand, like let's say, for example, he has like Atraxas or he has Archon, he can start discarding them to the Psychic Frog, and then that's an easy way to get them into the graveyard if you don't have something like an Entomb. But that will also grow the frog, and it'll help him block the Dragon's Rage Channeler and the Delver. But he does have to sacrifice a lot of his graveyard to do that. Looks like he's just going to pass the turn. Boston going to do the exact same thing he did the last few turns, just go straight into combat and attack for 6, effectively halving Jamie's life points here. Boston at 19, Jamie at 12. Going to activate the Psychic Frog, discard a Wasteland. Here's another one, going to discard an Atraxa. Boston going to pause here, going to let it happen. Psychic Frog going to go to 3/4 here. Going to exile everything. Sorry, exile 3 cards to give it flying so that he can try to block. But I think this is where we're going to see the Unholy Heat. Yeah, this is going to take out the Frog. So, like we said before, Dragon's Rage Channeler does have Delirium. We calculated Delirium before. This Unholy Heat is going to be dealing 6 damage. The damage can't be prevented. But there is a Surveil trigger on the stack. Boston going to look at it. It looks like a Delver. Pretty sure that card was all black. Looks like he's going to keep it on top. So this will help the double Force of Will in his hand. There is a Brazen Borrower in response to the Unholy Heat. Going to bounce the Delver of Secrets. Alright, that is gonna resolve. Delver is now back in the hand, so double Delver, double Force in Boston's hand. We're gonna resolve the Unholy Heat, kill the Psychic Frog. Jaime gonna take 3 from the Dragon's Rage Chandler, drop himself down to 9. And I think that's gonna be the end of Boston's turn. Not much action else to do unless he wants to play this Delver, but he doesn't really want to reveal that he has nothing else going on, I don't think. It's also, if Jaime does a double play that needs a double Force, then having access to double Force is not a terrible idea. Yeah, we're just going to see Boston pass the turn. Jaime going to draw for his. So he has 2 cards left. Can he get something started? Here is an Animate Dead. There's a quick Force of Will from Boston. Exactly why he wanted to keep Delver in the hand. To pitch to the Force of Will. So Jaime does not know what the next 2, what the last 2 cards are in Boston's hand. Jaime's just going to pass the turn after that failed Animate Dead. Boston going to swing in for another 3 points of damage with this Dragon's Rage Chandler. Drop Jaime down to 6. Down comes the Delver that Jaime did not know about. Looks like Boston's hand still Force of Will Delver. Alright, this is going to be a lot of pressure. If Jaime doesn't have a way to deal with one of these creatures, then this is not looking too great here. If he could deal with the graveyard somehow, he saves himself from death, because then he can stop Dragon Rage Chandler from being delirious and turn it into a 1/1. But we'll see. Here's Delver, flips over Ponder, gonna turn it into Insectile Aberration, which is a 3/2 flyer, but we're just gonna call it Delver. Here is Ponder from Boston. Gonna look at the top, or sorry, Surveil first. Underground Sea goes to the graveyard. Gonna resolve this Ponder. Sees Lightning Bolt, Polluted Delta, and Dragon's Rage Channeler. This Lightning Bolt probably gonna finish the job if Jaime can sneak a blocker from the Brazen Borrower. This would probably just finish it off. Here's the Brazen Borrower to try to block these 2 flyers. Boston can do 2 ways. He could just go to the damage and just, kill the Brazen Borrower, but here he's going to elect to bolt the fairy, trigger Surveil, going to dump the Polluted Delta, and that's going to leave no blockers for Jaime, and that is going to be going into game number 2. Alrighty, people, we are here for game number 2. So while these players resolve their mulligans, just going to briefly remind you that this is a Royalty of the North match, meaning that these players are playing a best of 5. What this also means is that these players are playing another game of unsideboarded Magic. What they do in Magic for best of 5s is that they play 2 unsideboarded games and then 3 or up to 3 sideboarded games. I think this is pretty much favored for Boston, seeing as how Delver is pretty much the aggro deck of the format. Best of 5 really kind of favors or kind of balances it out so that the aggro decks have a chance to play their game. But it's kind of going to be on Jaime to survive the either early onslaught from Boston's cheap effective creatures, or if he can enact his game plan through the slew of interaction spells that Delver has access to. So those are primarily Force of Will, Daze, Wasteland, and things of the sort. So Dimir Rescaminator, kind of on a similar axis, plays a somewhat similar tempo game plan. They also play the Wastelands. They don't really have the aggressive early starts that can be done with Grixis Delver through, Delver of Secrets and Dragon's Rage Chandler, but rather they kind of go and use the scam portions in their early turns. So Grief, Reanimate Grief, or you can Grief and kind of you can kind of Grief to check the opponent's hand if there's not much going on, or you can try to go for a big fatty and either do what Jaime tried to do in the first game, which is Psychic Frog, ditch whatever the fatties are in your hand, or you can try to Entomb for one of the game enders and put it into play either using Reanimate or Animate Dead. Usually the game finishers are Archon of Cruelty or Atraxa. Another plus side for playing the Dimir Rescaminator deck, if you're new to Legacy, is, you know, you can use Troll of Kaza Doom and just Swamp Cycle to get a 6/5 into your graveyard. That's really hard to block. That can end the game very, very quickly as well. So we're going to see both players take a mulligan. Jaime quickly going to go to 5, as will Boston. But both players going to 5 in the game number 2. I guess this is somewhat expected. Like, both of these decks are quite mana light. Especially, like, I guess Delver has always been known to play around 18 to 19 lands. Depends on the situation, but when 4 of them are wastelands, and a 3-color deck, not really tapping it for mana. I wonder which has the advantage. I'm maybe it's Dimir Rescaminator. Being only 2 colors, and then there's an argument for both, right? Like Dimir Rescaminator, it seems like a lot of its cards are 2 mana to be like quite effective. The only one that's like super effective and isn't 2 mana is probably Reanimate. In terms of action spells, right? Like obviously they play some number of dazes and Force of Wills, and you know, out of the board you get access to like Force of Negations and the sort. But being able to like not having as many 1-drops, but being able to free spell is like, they both have their upsides and they both have their downsides. So I'm actually wondering which deck is better positioned to operate on fewer lands. So for example, if both decks were only operating under 1 mana, I wonder which deck would be suited to be better, because they both play the Brainstorms, Ponders, and that stuff. Or we're gonna see Jaime start off with Wasteland into Swamp Cycle, Troll of Kaza Doom, gonna find an Underground Sea. But we're gonna, I guess it all comes down to whose like cantrips are better. Like Boston has a bit more board interaction, whereas Jaime attacks the hand. But I guess Jaime's decision needs to be, is it worth trying to grief my opponent? Like, do they have a card that's worth taking from my 2 cards? And the answer is pretty much almost always going to be yes. Like, just knowing what's in your opponent, or sorry, knowing what's in your opponent's hand is almost worth it enough. All right, we're gonna see Boston play Volcanic Island into Dragon's Rage Channeler. Pass it back. Jaime going to ponder off of an Underground Sea. Can I get a glimpse of what is in his hand, or what he's pondering? Again, you guys will have hand cams, so I'll be showing what Jaime is seeing here. Looks like he has a Psychic Frog in his hand. Not sure what else he's looking at. And again, if you guys are skipping through, I'll probably be putting chapters in here in the timeline below, but the reason why I don't know exactly what's in Jaime's hand is I am doing the commentary before I have access to the hand cams, just so that I can get this coverage to you guys faster. Alright, so Jaime tried to play a Polluted Delta, but he did play the Underground Sea into the Ponder for the turn. Probably just going to Wasteland the Volcanic Island and see if Boston has another land. Alright, so we're going to see who operates better on fewer lands. Does Boston have another land to follow it up? He does. He has an Underground Sea and a Wasteland of his own. Jaime only has 2 cards left in hand. Boston going to take his time, going to chip in for 1. Looks like he's going to Wasteland, take Jaime's Underground Sea. So who runs out of lands first? Jaime top decks a Wasteland. Gonna play the Polluted Delta. You did flash it last turn. Just gonna pass. Boston draws Scalding Tarn. So Boston's looking at Underground Sea, Scalding Tarn, Lightning Bolt, Delver, and I think it's a Daze at the end there. Nope, it's a Brainstorm. Gonna chip in for another 1 point of damage. Dragon's Rage Channeler doing its job. Alright. Boston looking like he's just gonna pass the turn. Not gonna play this Delver. Oh, maybe he is. He is. Down comes Delver. So looking to try to close out the game quickly. He can also set up his own Delver with a Brainstorm, but I think we're going to see Jaime crack this at the end of Boston's turn. Don't think there's any reason to... Unless he has a Daze of his own, he could kind of daze the Delver. But I'm not sure if that's worth it, especially if you're going for an Undercity Sewers. Putting yourself back behind or putting yourself back that much mana and that much tempo is, I don't know if that's where you want to be. I guess Boss is not applying too much pressure, especially with a non-delirious Dragon's Rage Channeler and only 3 cards in hand. I think Jaime needs to set something up quick. The problem is if Jaime tries to go for it and runs into like Force of Will or is not prepared for it, like both of these players have to play around Daze, which is the biggest issue. And that makes the Wasteland plan so effective. You're gonna see Jaime cast a Brainstorm. Finds a Animate Dead. I'm not sure what the other 2 cards he drew were. But yeah, so as I was saying is both these players have to play around Daze, so the Wasteland game plan is very, very strong. However, both these players have to be playing in this way. The problem is Boston's game plan is probably much better at this than Jaime's is. Because he has like these cheap deployable creatures that can kind of chip in over time, it's on Jaime to find a way to get something big going on and then forcing Boston to deal with it. Because Delver doesn't really ever do anything big other than play Murktide. So Jaime just has to... Jaime is basically the one who has to prove that he can get out of this. Or survive long enough to turn the tide. Now, it gets very hard when there's a Dragon's Rage Channeler on the board, because every time you're casting a cantrip or disruptive spell like Force of Will and Daze, you get to see way more cards in your deck. Put cards into your graveyard, which fuels your Delirium, or it fuels Murktide Regents, or it fuels Psychic Frog to an extent. Yeah, it's really rough. Here is Wasteland from Jaime. Gonna take out the Underground Sea, pass the turn to Boston. Boston gonna flip a Force of Will off of the Delver. Just has all of the aggro and all of the disruption that he needs. This is basically seeing Delver enact its game plan and doing the finest as just doing its job perfectly. We see Boston keeping Force of Will up, being able to cast it for free. Also has the Lightning Bolt available in case Jaime tries to play a creature that becomes problematic. It will also force Jaime's hand. Like, for example, if Jaime finds like a Psychic Frog, which is like pretty much the only boltable target other than his life total, it'll force Jaime to discard cards that he might not want to discard to save the frog. Because saving the frog is, like, 1, it's a blocker. 2, it's a potential blocker that will most likely cause Boston to not attack. Or it'll force the Dragon's Rage Channeler to attack when it's delirious. And then he can block, get rid of the Dragon's Rage Channeler, kind of stunt the Delver. Another thing that Boston could do is he could trade it in and then just force the frog to eat Jaime's own graveyard. That's another thing. But we're going to see Jaime kind of suffering on 1 mana here. He does have the Troll of Khazad-dûm in the graveyard, which is a pretty sizable threat. We know that he has the Animate Dead, but he needs to find a second source of mana to cast it, which was kind of used on the Wasteland. And you see Boston crack the Scalding Tarn, going to go after a Thundering Falls, so this is a Surveil land of his own, and going to Surveil. Has a look at it, gonna keep it on top, draw for the turn, gonna go straight into combat, swing in for 6, drops Jaime down to 9. Sorry, not 6, he's attacking for 4. Kind of automatically assumed that the Dragon's Root Channel was Delirious, but there's only 5 lands in Boston's graveyard. Here's an Entomb from Jaime. So I think this is during his upkeep. Sorry, yeah, his upkeep, because he hasn't drawn yet. All right, Boston thinking about whether or not he wants to daze. I think it has to be because he had to untap the Undercity Steward. Here's Boston going to cast a daze, going to trigger Surveil. Pretty much floating. Is it blue? Do you feel blue for the Brainstorm? Could have floated red too. My guess has to depend on like when this is during the turn. We're gonna see Boston resolve the Surveil, going to bin the Mishra's Bauble, going to resolve the Daze. Looks like he did float red mana, so that's gonna trigger Surveil again. It should drop Jaime down to 6. So is he now Delirious? No, it'll be 2 instances, an artifact, and lands. Sorry, now 3 instances, an artifact, and lands. Still only 4. Sorry, still only 3. Did I miss something? No, it looks like Jamie's just gonna pack it up though. Anyway, yeah, on to sideboards. Alright everybody, we are going to begin sideboarding. So we're going to look at Boston's deck list first, just because he's on the player 1 side. So the things that are pretty much guaranteed to come in are the 2 Grafdigger's Cage and the 2 Surgical Extractions. He is playing against basically a Reanimator deck, at least I think that's Jamie's primary game plan. So putting a stop to that, especially being on the draw in this game, he's going to want to try to prevent Jamie's explosive starts as possible. So that's going to be covered by the Grafdigger's Cage and hopefully the Surgical Extractions. We're also going to see him bring in some number of Pyroblasts and Red Elemental Blasts. Psychic Frog is just such a strong backup plan that having just an easy removal spell, basically an unconditional removal spell, is just too good to pass up on. And then we're going to see a Spell Pierce come in from Boston. Because he's going down on the Force of Wills, this is going to help him in a couple of counter wars. I don't because both players are playing like a Wasteland strategy backed up with Daze. I don't see them cutting their Dazes in this matchup. So just having that extra source of somewhat cheap counterspell interaction, it might help. It might come in handy in the long run. So what you're seeing on the screen now is what the deck list looks post board. So you can see all the stuff that came in the middle. So the things that came out were 3 Lightning Bolts, 2 Force of Wills, 1 Murktide Regent, and 2 Delver of Secrets. I imagine that we see somewhat of a similar sideboard strategy come from Jaime as well. But although he has to take a different approach because he's not as aggressive. He's seen that Boston is willing to keep a little bit of a slow... Sorry. It's hard to say because Boston's hands were very aggressive, and he now needs to keep in mind that he has to have a way of dealing with Boston's board presence. So that's why we're probably going to be seeing the Fatal Pushes, the Go for the Throats. Orcish Bowmaster is fantastic in this matchup, and we don't see Boston having any of those Orcish Bowmasters as well. We're going to see the Brazen Borer come in. This is just one way of getting rid of the Grafdigger's Cage that's going to be coming in. and Nile Spellbomb does decently well to prevent Murktide and then kind of shrink the Dragon's Rage Channeler. So what's coming out from Jaime is going to be 4 Force of Wills, 1 Animate Dead, 1 Entomb, and 1 Grief. So he is laying a little bit lighter on the Reanimate strategy, and he's taking out the Grief because just going negative against a deck like Delver, like you beat Delver by having as much, trying to get more card advantage than they do card selection, which is really, really hard to do. But I think this is a pretty solid sideboard strategy. Just cutting out all of the card disadvantage and just trying to rely on hopefully landing Psychic Frog, hopefully being able to catch Boston off guard with the Orcish Bowmasters, and having so many Brazen Borrowers. Hopefully he can kind of make an attempt at out-tempoing the Delver, the tried and true Delver strategy. So I think we're getting into them shuffling up and starting to draw their first hand. So let's get back into the game. Okie dokie, we are starting game number 3. Boston is up 2-0. Jaime has a huge mountain to climb. He has to win 3 straight to stop Boston's reign of terror. As you guys hopefully know by now, he is the Season 1 king. He's also the Season 3 king. And now this is the 4th Royalty of the North match that we're having. So we will see if he will have a 3rd crown. So yeah, hopefully you guys are familiar with the seasons of Legacy of the North. Season 1 was Boston in a Grixis mirror match against Jesse. Jesse won Season 2 by being the points leader and winning our Invitational. That was also with some form of Delver deck. She always flip-flopped between either Temur or Grixis. So she was the undisputed winner. And then Season 3 was Boston versus Dominic Harvey in a Lands mirror. And now we are here in the 4th King of the North, or sorry, Royalty of the North match in Grixis Delver against Dimir Rescaminator. So that's Boston versus Jaime. Seeing Jaime go down to 6, having to mulligan a lot during this match. Not something you want to be seeing. But gotta keep good hands. Alright, Boston draws for his turn, is a Flooded Strand. Jaime started off with only a Polluted Delta. So we haven't really seen Jaime been able to do the namesake of the deck, which is a Scam. So that's Grief, Reanimate, and then bring back Grief. But I'm not sure if that's the correct strategy to do here. Maybe that's too much card disadvantage, but being like trading 3 cards for your opponent's best 2 and then knowing what's going on in their hand might not be a bad idea. Although Grix, like Delver does play a lot of free counter spells, so if you try to keep a hand of like Grief, I guess like taking a Force of Will and another card out of Boston's hand is like not a terrible thing when you try to Grief, especially if you run the risk. That's actually like to turn the tables, right? If you Grief, exile a black card, and then your opponent, like let's say for example, if Boston uses a Force of Will, he goes down Force of Will blue card. Jaime is like down black card and Grief. He can reanimate and then take the best card out of Boston's hand from that point. But we're not going to see that happen. Boston's going to try to cast a Grafdigger's Cage after playing a Mishra's Bauble. I think Jaime's going to respond to the Grafdigger's Cage, so I don't think it's fully resolved yet. Down comes Undercity Sewers. So this is a play that we see Jaime do a lot. I'm not. It's very hard because like if this is a Daze coming up, you're still setting yourself. You're kind of putting yourself super behind on mana. Like if you fetch an Undercity Sewer, you don't have access to mana that turn. Then if you daze it back to your hand and then you replay the Undercity Sewers again, you still don't have access to that mana, and then you're also playing against a Delver deck which has Wastelands. If they wasteland away that Undercity Sewers, it's almost like it's just an all-round feels bad. Alright, Jaime going to Surveil, going to ditch a Scalding Tarn. Here's a Daze, returns the Undercity Sewer to the hand. Is Boston going to Force of Will this Daze? I don't think so. He's up 2 games. If he lets the Grafdigger's Cage die, he still has a Force of Will to stop Jaime from casting like an Entomb or like an Enabler. He basically Jaime's like so far away from being able to get a fatty onto the board. Boston has so much time, and he also has a backup Force of Will as well. Or sorry, not Force of Will. He has like the Force of Will, and he has the Pyroblast as backup for any counter magic Jaime may have. But Boston going to let the Daze resolve, going to counter the Grafdigger's Cage, pass it back to Jaime. Jaime going to play the Undercity Sewers for his land for the turn. Now he's think tanking on this Surveil trigger. Now the thing is Boston is he's lacking something that he's had the last 2 games, and that's pressure. So if Jaime can find a way through Boston's hand, which is Force of Will, Brainstorm, Wasteland, Pyroblast, a lot of cards, mind you, a lot of cards. If he can overcome this, then he could be in a pretty okay position. The other problem is we also haven't seen Jaime been able to apply pressure either. But I don't know. I don't think that's how this deck applies pressure. It's not through creatures. It's more through, does he have the scam combo, or can he put a fatty into play as quick as possible? But I don't think Boston is really worried about those questions because he has so many answers in his hand. Especially with that Wasteland. He has a Wasteland for the Undercity Sewer, so he can keep Jaime on 0 mana. Ooh, we are finally seeing a Grief being evoked here. So Grief pitching Grief. Boston not going to do anything because it's worse to Force of Will here. Jaime, I don't know. I think you would take the Brainstorm here. If he takes the Brainstorm, Boston just Wastelands, passes. Doesn't really do much. He can crack the Mishra's Bauble to draw a card. Oh, going for the Force of Will instead. So that means Jaime is trying to set something up. But he doesn't have a land drop. This is kind of awkward. So this is what I mean. Oh, he does have a land drop. He played the Undercity Sewers and he had to... Did he? What did he keep? He kept something on top, right? There's a Wasteland, takes out the Undercity Sewers. So now Jaime back to 0 mana. Here's a Polluted Delta. I don't see Jaime doing much else. He hasn't done much else with this hand. Maybe he really wanted the second source of mana for like an Animate Dead. Again, Boston has no pressure going on, so Jaime does have time. Boston draws Ponder off of the draw for his turn. So being very, very disciplined with this Mishra's Bauble. Doesn't really have a reason to crack it either. Although he could use it to just dig a little deeper into the deck. He could also be playing around Graveyard Hate. So for example, if Jaime has boarded in some sort of Graveyard Hate, then... Actually, no, there's a Grafdigger's Cage in the... if there's like a Nile Spellbomb or something, then Jaime can do a trick and get rid of Boston's Graveyard and just shrink the Dragon's Root Channeler or the Delirium for Unholy Heat, but I think you just cut those anyway. Doesn't really matter. Boston going to crack the Mishra's Bauble and just get into the graveyard. Gonna see a Brainstorm after checking the top of his own library. So he sees another Bauble, a Murktide Regent, and a Force of Will. Oof, Boston's hand just got real good. With that Murktide Regent, now he can apply some pressure. He also has the Force of Will he drew as another defense card. So he now has Force of Will with Pyroblast backup once again on top of Murktide Regent. He also has the double blue to pay for it with this Flooded Strand that he's about to drop onto the battlefield. This is looking pretty good for Boston. Going to crack the Polluted Delta at the end of Boston's turn. Jaime going to search for Underground Sea. Down it comes. Going to try to Entomb. Get something started again. Now the question is, does Jaime have the a Reanimate? If he has a Reanimate, Boston would be... Yeah, okay. So he's just gonna cause Boston to Force of Will, exile the Ponder. Gonna just stop Jaime from trying to get a fatty into the graveyard. So the best target is now, again, the only solo Grief in the graveyard. However, if he does have the Reanimate and he does Grief, he does take the Murktide out of Boston's hand. So that will alleviate the pressure. The Force of Will is now gone, and you can't Pyroblast a black card. There's a Reanimate. Gonna go after the Grief. Only creature in the graveyard. Alright. Jaime down to 14, Boston at 18. Boston going to reveal his hand, showing Pyroblast, Murktide Regent, and Underground Sea. Going to take that Murktide Regent, so Boston cannot apply pressure. Now Jaime has a win condition on the board in the form of Grief. I laugh, but, you know, Delver's built on 3/2s. Here's another Mishra's Bauble. Going to crack it. Look at his own top of the deck. Going to crack the Flooded Strand. Doesn't need that card on the top. Brings himself down to 17. Going to Thundering Falls. Alright, so Boston playing Grixis Delver with a Surveil land. These lands are so good because it turns all of your fetch lands, basically... Oh, I didn't turn all of them. Hypothetically, it turns all of them into look at the top card of your deck and decide whether or not you want to keep it. But you can only do it the number of times you have Surveil lands. But good enough for Boston. Going to chuck that Underground Sea into the graveyard. Gonna draw off of that Mishra's Bauble. Trigger. Jaime finds a second Underground Sea. Gonna swing in with the Grief, tying it up 14 all. Does he have a follow-up play? Does not. Gonna pass back to Boston. Boston gonna untap. Finds Dragon's Reach Channeler. Alright. This is gonna come down to a good old-fashioned race. He does have Delirium, I believe. Artifact, land, creature, instant. Does have Delirium. It's going to resolve. Down comes Wasteland and passes the turn. I'm going to see... Alright, Jaime at the end of Boston's turn, going to flash in on Orcish Bowmaster. Going to ping him down to 13. There's a Wasteland going to get fired off. Take out an Underground Sea. Jaime back down to 1 mana. Alright, Jaime top decks. Doesn't look like it's anything relevant, but this is a pretty decent board. Gonna swing in with the Lone Grief. Drop Boston down to 10. Jaime at 14. Gonna pass the turn. Boston gonna draw for his. There's a Misty Rainforest. So looking at Misty Rainforest, Pyroblast. Just gonna go straight into combat. Swing in for 3 points of damage. Drops Jaime down to 11. Here's another Entomb from Jaime. Going to resolve. Okay, now we can get something going. However, there's already been 1 Reanimate used. Alright, Jaime looking at Archon of Cruelty. Alright, I'm curious to know what's in his hand. You folks at home will know what's in his hand at this point in time. The hand cams should be up there. The hand cam should have been going and revving by now. But we do have, due to the camera's angles, we do get to see Boston's hand a lot more than Jaime's. All right, Jaime gonna draw for his turn. It's time to go straight into combat. Swing in for 5 points of damage. It's a 2-turn clock. Yep, go straight into the combat step. Boston goes down to 5. Cannot block. Oof. There's nothing from Jaime. Boston going to cast Pyroblast targeting Dragon's Reach Channeler. That's going to trigger Surveil, but not going to do anything upon resolution. Unless Jaime has a way to bring Painter into play and name blue. But I don't think that's what his deck does. Right, Boston going to pitch Delver from the Surveil trigger. Gonna untap for his turn. Draws. So now we know he has a Misty Rainforest. He's gonna go straight into combat. Swing in for 3. Drops Jaime down to 8. Found a Psychic Frog for his draw for turn. There, it's going to come down. This is going to be a decent blocker against Grief. Oh no, he cannot block against Grief. He has, because Grief has Menace. He has to block the Orc Army or the Bowmaster. Probably the Orc Army because it has the potential to grow. I guess, yeah. There's a Brainstorm from Jaime. Right, finds Daze, Psychic Frog, and he does have Reanimate, but cannot cast it because it will kill him. This is a tough decision. Yeah, Boston did such a good job with these Wastelands. Looks like Jaime just couldn't keep the amount of lands that he needed. And he can't use these dazes very well either, because you can't double daze in 1 turn. Boston's operating on 3 mana, so these days is not effective here. So Jaime swings, brings Boston down to 2, passes the turn. I'm curious if he swung with everything, it would bring... If he swung with everything, it would bring Boston down to 1, because he blocks with the Psychic Frog. And then, in order to not die to the Grief, Boston would have to exile his graveyard to the Frog to make Dragon's Reach Channeler not delirious. I think Jaime should have attacked with the entire team. The problem is we've seen Boston play Lightning Bolts. If Jaime is playing around the Bolts or the Unholy Heat, this is a better attack. So Boston, we know that Boston has a Misty Rainforest in his hand. Oh, yeah, there it is. Wow. There's a Murktide Regent. Going to exile 5 lands, going to keep it a 3/3. So this is a neat trick that I completely forgot about, because we don't really see Murktide Regents with Psychic Frogs nowadays. But when you exile your instants and sorceries to Psychic Frog to give it flying, it grows your Murktide Regent. So Boston is perfectly fine exiling all of the lands out of the graveyard. So this allows the Murktide Regent to block. This also got rid of the lands in Boston's graveyard, so this Dragon's Reach Channeler does not have to attack. So he has extremely good blockers here. Wow, that Murktide Regent really kind of put the nail in the coffin here. Here's Jaime swinging with everything. So no matter what, Boston has to double block the Grief, otherwise he's just going to straight up die. So Frog or Murktide is probably going to block the Orc army. And then the other one can block with the Dragon's Reach Chandler with the Grief. No matter what, Boston's going to lose a creature here, but it doesn't... How many instances does he have in his graveyard? He has Pyroblast, Force of Will, Brainstorm, Force of Will, so that's only 4. And if he discards a card, that's... So 4 plus 3 is 7. And then Psychic Frog is 8, 9. Yeah, this is... Unless Jaime has a trick up his sleeve, like a Fatal Push or something. It's not looking too good here. So even if Jaime attacked with everything last turn, because Boston top decked the Murktide, the Grief could be blocked. No, yeah, this is rough. We just couldn't see Jaime enact his game plan. There was not enough scamming and not enough reanimating. Like, he tried his best, but Boston just had all of the answers. Like, it was crazy how many Force of Wills with, like, the correct blue cards. I say correct blue cards, but, like, Force of Will backup was just nutty on Boston's side. And then all of the Wastelands just keeping Jaime down at, like, 1 mana this entire game was pretty intense. Alright, so they're going to go to damage. Gonna kill the Dragon's Reach Chandler instead of the Murktide. Actually, this might have been a mistake too. If you kill the Murktide first, you have way more of a chance to deal with the Dragon's Reach Chandler and the Psychic Frog. Because like a fatal, like, again, I'm working under the understanding that there's some number of fatal pushes or like black removal spells in Jaime's deck, but you should be able to take care of the Psychic Frog and Dragon's Reach Chandler much more easily than a Murktide Regent. Unless because you're not playing Pyroblast. So here's Psychic Frog, gonna exile 3 instances out of the graveyard, gonna put 3 counters onto Murktide, going to activate it again. There's only 1 instance in there. Gonna pump Murktide to 4, swing in, and that is gonna be the game. So that is Boston being crowned King of the North for the 3rd time. However, it's not the 3rd time in a row. That's something that I have to mention. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. Hey, you know what? Like, maybe Grief isn't that bad, you know? Maybe Wizards was actually onto something, and maybe Grixis Delver is really just the real boogeyman of the format. Let me know what you guys think. I know what all the comments are going to be in retaliation to this. You guys are probably most likely going to be watching this after the ban announcement anyway. Hopefully, you guys still enjoy it. I know a lot of the online players and the legacy community in general is just kind of sick of Grief and the play patterns that it enacts. But hopefully, you guys enjoyed that. And hopefully, this isn't too irrelevant. Like, this was also a masterclass of being able to manipulate the top of your deck and making sure that you play to all of your defensive capabilities as a Delver player. You need to know when to deploy your threats and when not to. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you guys next time. Peace easy.